At its very core, drug science must remain independent. This means we don't accept sponsorships. It's with the support of the drug science community we're able to do this and make the podcast in the first place. If you're able to become a drug science community member and support the show, you too will be supporting the dissemination of evidence-based drug policies. Without you, none of this would be possible. For anybody interested, there's a link in the show notes. Thank you. Hello and welcome to the Drug Science Podcast with me, David Nutt. Here we're bringing together experts and activists for a rational, honest and informed conversation about drugs. Well, welcome to another Drug Science Podcast. And tonight I have a remarkable man, Darren Le Baron. And he's remarkable for a number of reasons, which he will explain later. But I just want to share with you why I invited him to the show. Because just a few weeks ago, we were giving a talk in East London. And I'd not met Darren before. And I was blown away by both his presentation, his knowledge about psychedelics, particularly when used in the indigenous context. And he'll tell you about the places he's lived and the experiences he's had. And also how he's pioneering agriculture in the deepest east of London in school children. So he's bringing plants to schools which almost didn't have any kind of vegetation before. So he's got a lot of interests, remarkable man. And I thought it's about time that at least maybe a bigger audience. I don't know. He may have a bigger audience than me, but at least I'm sure there are quite a few people who are listening to this who haven't heard of him. And you're going to love listening to him and learning what he's got to say. So Darren, great to have you on the show.
David, thank you for the invitation. It's also a pleasure to share a space and place with you again, man. So, man, I'm happy to be here. And, I'm sure either or both of our audiences will appreciate our dialogue, man.
Well, that's right. Actually, you spread the word to yours as well. So, maybe start off by telling people what you actually do now, because that was what I found really fascinating, the way you're bringing botany and agriculture and gardening to school children in London. Tell us a bit about that and how you got into that, please.
Yeah, man. No, thank you. So, my name's Darren Le Baron, and I actually, like you said, man, I come from East London, and I have a background working with what they would call, hard to reach communities. And I've been doing that for some years now in different areas. I've used football, music, creative arts, filmmaking, you name it, to engage young people who some would say are on the wrong side of the tracks. And I'm trying to engage them in, productive activities. And over the years, I was on my own personal journey, and that led me into horticulture. And that was after I spent my very first trip, which is about 24 years ago now, when I went to Barbados for the first time. That's where my family's from. And I realized that I come from a family of farmers, man. And I was really inspired, wanted to come back, get my hands dirty, and continue with the inspirations that I got while I was in Barbados. And while studying, I got the bug, man. I was already interested in mushrooms from a perspective of, wanting to learn more about altered states of consciousness or enhanced states of consciousness. I've kind of always been interested in that. And little did I know that on my horticultural journey, it would also redirect me to mushrooms again, because while studying, my two favorite units was soil science and composting. Just loved them both. And I found out the magic behind soil and the magic behind composting was this thing called mycelium. And mycelium was the fungus that eventually produced mushrooms. And I was like, oh, damn, like on my spiritual path and on my horticultural path, they're both leading me to mushrooms. And that's basically
your destiny.
Yeah, man. It was like the beginning of me like fully immersing into that world. But during that time of studying, I was also inspired to share some of my horticultural knowledge with the communities that I was engaging, football and creative arts with. So I was kind of learning on the job. I was studying 1 week, and then a couple of weeks later, I was teaching what I was learning to, hard to reach communities, because it's like an initiative that they wanted to develop. And that was the beginning of me really getting into education with young people officially. And we was going into schools, just teaching young people about organic food growing, horticulture. We set up like food enterprise programs and initiatives, primarily for young people who had been kicked out of school or were in what we call pupil referral units. It was like an in-between place between school and, those who might have come out of prison, for example, and re-entering education. It was like a halfway house, let's say, as well as just young people in schools, from primary school all the way through. But because of my passions with mushrooms, as that kept on growing and developing, it inspired me to also want to like really focus on that. And I then had a trajectory that was basically, look, if I want to keep teaching, or you'd like me to teach, keep teaching in schools, I want to educate people about mushrooms. So I was already with adults teaching about psychedelic mushrooms, the history and the culture and an indigenous approach. But when it came to young people, I felt they was also should be privy to this stuff, because learning that mushrooms are the soil creators and they're what communicate and connect all the plants and all of this type of stuff that I was learning in my 30s. I thought, man, young people need to learn about this stuff. So cut a long story short, it inspired me to develop this curriculum. And it's an accreditation now that young people all around the nation can get. Anybody from 5 years old up can get accredited in mushroom cultivation. So we have an entry level, a level 1, a level 2, food enterprise, or how to set up a mushroom enterprise initiative. And it's being run out in schools in and around the country now. So that's what I do.
Wow,
in regards to I feel like what you wanted to know.
Well, yeah, to be honest, Sarah, I didn't realize it was a national program. So you're training or teaching school kids all over the country, horticulture via, are they allowed to grow them and take them home and eat them?
Most definitely. That's the whole process, man. It can't be all theory, man. You got to make it like my whole thing was giving young people tangible alternatives, things that they can actually do, that they can apply and see as a tangible alternative to what they may have been doing or not been doing, because they may not have been interested in some other things. So, with the older students, it was like more of a food enterprise, like grow food to sell food. Because a lot of the young people that I was working with were getting in trouble because like they were trying to sell drugs, man. If I keep it really real, man, like a lot of the young children were trying to live the fast life. And like I said, I was trying to give them tangible alternatives. So my whole goal was to get them from selling weed bags to salad bags. That was like our premise.
That's a great strap line. That's brilliant.
Man. And like we was going to find every corner, every street, every hotel, every restaurant, any and everybody who eats food. So David, do you eat food?
Sadly, I too much, yes.
Because
probably not enough mushrooms.
Because we'll be trying to find you too with our product, So that was like the goal. That was the premise of like everybody eats food, man. So like let's create a product and package it and present it in a way. You've got an amazing USP, guys, because you're the bad boy trying to do the good stuff now and like use that to your advantage. And that was the beginning of it all. And it led to like doing this mushroom initiative. And we've got the very first mushroom academy in the UK, possibly Europe, maybe the world, for young people out in the Barnet area. And they're still doing amazing work out there. So yeah, man, it's one of my...
Tell us a bit more about the academy. So students come, to work for a period? I mean,
so
is it after schools or
this is part of an academy now, because a lot of schools are now transitioning into becoming academy. So it's an academy in collaboration with We Are Grow. The project's called We Are Grow, and we work with students who are challenged. So they're still, in this case here, they're still within the school, but they may be within SEN, require special educational needs and or have signed up for extracurricular activities. So it's a range, a plethora of different types of students. We work with them throughout the term time, and they learn about nature, they learn about the soil, and the focus being fungus. And they grow food to sell food. And that is open to any and every student that's in the UK. Any school can incorporate this program into their curriculum. Usually it's, an extracurricular activity, and or it can be interwoven into the science, curriculum, and or depending on how the school, provisions require it. So this is what we do and how we do it. I do a lot more teacher training now because I can't be in all these schools doing what I need to do in the schools with a quality delivery. So now I'm in other places and spaces. I focus more on the teacher training and get teachers equipped and ready so they can go and, teach the students and get them good, ready to go.
Yeah, I suppose you probably find teachers are actually quite interested in doing something a bit different like this. It's much, very different from the didactic teaching that I guess they would typically do. And they probably quite like getting their hands a bit dirty as well, do they?
That's it. Well, that was the whole thing that used to inspire me, man. During my teacher training and different activities that I would be involved in, I'm like, well, how comes when I go on teacher training programs, they make it fun and interactive, but when I'm working with my young students, we just got them in front of a blackboard and asking them to sit still all day. Like, let's get them out, let's get them proactively out there and engaging in stuff. And so I'm saying that to just say that my teacher training, the adult classes and the young people's classes are one and the same. Adults are just really big kids, so it's they enjoy it too.
And so some of these kids have gone on to set up food growing businesses then. Yes.
Oh, yeah, definitely, man. We've got some like ongoing programs that, run throughout the term time that we've done over the years. And yeah, we've got programs now where young people have come off the back of it and have set up their own enterprise. In fact, I have a student who's become our business partner. So that's how close to home and far they've gone with their programs that they inspired me to want to break bread with them, as we say. So yeah, man.
Yeah, I love when you were speaking, or when you were talking about how when you first brought this into the schools, and yeah, there was a sense of kind of disbelief and almost resistance. And then you said, we're going to grow mushrooms. And they said, and then you said, but, about, there's other kinds of mushrooms, aren't there? And once you started using the magic word, then people got interested in all mushrooms, I think.
Yeah, like I always had to because you got to meet people where they're at, and you definitely need to meet young people where they're at and engage them with their interests. So even that's why I said we went from growing, weed bags to salad bags, because in my first session they would say, oh, the gardener's coming in, and I was like, look, don't call me the gardener, because like it doesn't go down too well, like. But nonetheless, the food growing guy is coming in, and like I come in, and the first thing, it could be anything from flipping tables to students just not engaged, and the first thing they would usually say is like, we're not interested in food growing. This is BS. Who cares? I'll buy my food from Nando's and all that type of stuff. So my thing was like really getting them engaged and understanding that, like everybody eats food and this, that, and the other. But they're like, no, but we'll be interested if you teach us how to grow weed, sir. We're interested in growing weed, like that'll be a good look. So, these are so again, I'll just meet them where they're at. I'll be like, ironically, the skills that I'm about to share with you could go away and cultivate weed, but that's not the choice or option that I would suggest, because there's many other options out there. And what we'll break down is that probably the reason why they just want to go out there and smoke weed is because they're followers. And that's what I was kind of like, pull their card. I'm like, oh, you guys are not leaders, are you? Like, you're all followers. You're just following what other people are doing. Because if I was to provide you with a product that we could cultivate that generates more income than marijuana does, would you be interested still? Because if we just transform the product, and you're saying that you're doing what you're doing to make money, like you want to make money, well, I can show you how to make money, and it's not illegal, and the police won't be after us. Your parents will be proud of you, like we're ticking many other boxes. So what are you saying? Why do you want to just sell weed? And the same thing would be the conversation around mushrooms as well. They're like, I don't like the taste of mushrooms. And, I hear it all the time, man. I'm out in the concrete jungles of London and around the world and hearing people disrespect mushrooms a lot over the years. So I find ways in just speaking and meeting people where they're at. So usually, like you said, man, most people have only sampled one mushroom. When they think about mushrooms, they just think of the chestnut mushroom, the button mushroom, or the portobello mushroom, which is actually just the same mushroom at different stages of its growth. But that's what they're familiar with, and they think that's all mushrooms and the be all and end all of them. I'm like, no, man. And mushrooms, based upon their taste, is dependent upon how they're seasoned. How your mushrooms being seasoned determines how they taste. So like, if you can get somebody who knows what they're doing in the kitchen, I can make mushroom taste really cool, and tasty. So like,
do you teach them cooking skills as well then?
Oh yeah, man, that was all part of the program as well. Yeah, as I said, it's like transferable skills. Like, it was all about you leaving here knowing what mushrooms are, how to grow them, how to cook them, how to turn them into medicine, how to utilize them in all of their forms. So you've got a skill set, and what you might find is a niche. And perfect example being, I had many students just saying like, well, none of those areas I'm interested in. I don't want to care about growing. I don't care about selling them or eating them. I'll be like, oh, so what are you into? And they're like, I'm into hair, I'm into beauty. I want to get into beauty. And I'll be like, all right, bring me your latest beauty product that you're interested in. And they'll bring a beauty product in, and I'll be like, 9 times out of 10, there's a plant in there. There's something in there that comes from nature, like the active compound or ingredient. And I'll be like, all right, look, you can see that this ties into your, the thing that you're interested in, because I can always find a way of tying it in. You can't get away from mushrooms, and just make it relevant, speak their language. And I'll be like, well, maybe you could be a marketer. You could look at the narrative, the story, and tell a story of how this compound is now ended up in your beauty product, and learn, and just find a place and space where they might be interested in it. And that's what I do, how I go about doing it. And I guess that's why I've made some good traction over the years with students, because I speak their language.
Well, I have no doubt you do that. But I mean, it is quite challenging to bring horticulture to schools, most of which wouldn't even have a garden. How do you actually do that?
Yeah, well, like, what can I say, man? I grew up without having a garden, like I come from an urban environment. So that was like my approach. It was like, look, you actually don't even need a garden. Or better yet, I'm familiar with permaculture. Let's observe and survey. Let's take some of these tools and principles I learned from permaculture and let's see where your garden's at, because you do have a garden. And maybe your garden is your windowsill. Maybe that is the space and place that you've got. And then we're going to work with that space. Because if that's all you've got is a windowsill or a balcony, or can we look for, which we tended to do with the communities around us, identify, spaces in and around the community, whether that was the school and or the surrounding areas, like abandoned spaces, and, speak with the council and see if we could set up, these initiatives with the council behind us. It took some work, but we did get some traction. And I usually say, you got to find a teacher in the school who's interested in food growing. That's really, you got to find the teacher, then they can pitch it to the head teacher. You get the head teacher on side, and then you get the PTA on side. You got to get like a few people on side, and then it puts you in a productive space to be able to go and talk to councils and talk to, a local restaurant who might have a roof space. There's just different ways of approaching it. So if we don't have a green space, let's identify one and let's see if we can take it over. Let's do what mushrooms do and colonize the place, man, and do a sustainable thing with it.
You are the mushroom man. Yeah, so Darren, your journey to that sort of career was, quite challenging, wasn't it? I mean, I remember you talking about your childhood and your education and how you came to this through a kind of realization there were better ways, or, you could have gone in other directions, let's put it that way.
Yeah, man. And like I said, I speak their language, Dave, because I was one of those young people. I was at the edge. I was at the verge of, I could have been that bad boy, rude boy, and get caught up in the lifestyle. I was right at the edge, I tasted it. And I also was aware of what it took me to take the step away from that lifestyle. And yeah, it wasn't easy. So with that said, and I had some real inspirational friends around me, because we're all on the same path, and we all made a kind of conscious effort and decision to, step away from that, as some of us at the inception and some of us down the line. But, we all went on to do amazing work in our communities, primarily in East London. As I said, starting with football, we started football initiatives, and, we all wanted to be rappers at one point in time. So let's do a music production program. And this was what got me away from those temptations of the streets, So I was like, well, let's create those experiences for young people. And because of my own personal revelations and experiences with mushrooms and what it brought to my world, I was like, there's nothing that's made a transformation in my life like mushrooms. I've used football, I've used music, all these things have been amazing, but obviously psilocybin mushrooms have been transformational for me and others. So I was like, let me at least not wait till they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, having a midlife crisis, wondering and just finding out what mushrooms are all about. Maybe we could educate them about mushrooms, and we just do that in a very responsible way. So for me, that's, what and how I stepped away from, as I said, just continuing to be on the wrong path and just creating an alternative. And, I call it spreading the spores. It's just putting the information out there, allowing them to capture it, store it, hold on to it, and implement it as and when, it's relative in their world. But as long as you plant the seeds, you can hold on to them, and they may lay there dormant for a while, but trusting that they eventually germinate and spring and blossom and all of that good stuff down the line.
So it was mushrooms it brought you to other forms of horticulture, was it?
Well, no, actually, I said it kind of as I said, those two pathways. So, ironically, it was, from my teens, I was very much interested in altered states of consciousness. I was inspired by dreams. That was the first thing I really was fascinated from a child, dreams, wow, what are dreams? We can dream things, that are there, that are not there, the past, present, future. It was just I found it fascinating. That's always been the path that led me to wanting to learn more. And because I'm first generation born in the UK, as I mentioned, my family's from Barbados. I've got a lineage that goes back to Africa. I've very much been inspired to try to connect those dots, and learning more about African traditions and culture. Dreams are very important, and enhanced states of consciousness and different forms of healing modalities, as we refer to them now, or practices that they do, led me to wanting to know, well, what do they actually do and how do they do it? And then I found out that they make these brews and concoctions, and they drink them, and they light fires, and they dance, and they communicate with ancestors and connect with spirits and all of that type of stuff. And yeah, I've been interested in that for as long as I can remember. And that was my way in. But it was through horticulture, because I basically just wanted to grow food for my family. As I mentioned, I had a 9-month-old daughter, and I just wanted to grow food for her. I wanted to not be dependent upon the system, so to speak, or the stores. I wanted to provide food. And little did I know that would also redirect me to mushrooms. So it was like these two separate, I thought they were separate, but they weren't really. They were one in the same pathways that just really got me onto, like a holistic lifestyle, a holistic way of living.
Yeah, that's a lovely story. And I should explain to the listeners that if they ever get a chance, they should hear you speak, because you have just the most amazing set of slides, some of which are slides of when you went to, I think, to find some of this ancestral use of mind-altering substances in Gabon. And I think you spent some time there. Do you want to share with us?
Close, but no cigars. It wasn't Gabon. I was rolling with a ganger from Gabon recently. I had him over from the UK. But no, I had traveled Africa though, but the slides I was sharing were from South Africa, in fact, Namibia and Southern Africa, where I had just returned from like the end of last year, 2024. So yes, because that was all just part of a story and legacy that I was unpacking for my own personal journey. Like I said, I'm first generation born here, man. I've been trying to work out my lineage and how the hell did I end up being born in the UK? Yeah, what's the story? And on that story of growing up in East London, going to school in North London, Roman Catholic schools, and being taught about Adam and Eve and all of that good stuff, since a child, I've been wanting to find out who Adam and Eve are and where they're from, and they did teach me in school. They said that life started in Africa, that's where the first humans were. And so I was like, well, that obviously must be where Adam and Eve come from. So I've been trying to find out who Adam and Eve were. On my journey, I come to find out who the first people are, who the first humans in this current cycle are. And they are so-called pygmy people. And they are people that you find in Central Africa, yes, in Gabon, Uganda, the Congo, you name it. And they go by the names of the Aka, the Baka, the Booty, the Babongo, the Twa. There's just a handful of them, well, more than a handful of them in the central regions. And in Southern Africa, you have the Khoisan or the Khoi or the Khoi or the San, who are commonly called the Bushmen. So these are like the earliest humans that we know on planet Earth. There's nobody who predates these guys. So I discovered and found out for myself at least, who Adam and Eve were for real, because they couldn't teach me that in school. And then later on in life, I wanted to know whether or not what was that forbidden fruit that they ate? What was all that about? And did that have anything to do with psychedelics? Because that had come up a few times.
Well, we need to hear the answer to that. What was your conclusion?
Oh yeah, man. Oh yeah, that's what they do, man. And over the years, I studied many books and files and been doing my research. And I felt like I have to go out there and, see it for myself, experience it for myself. So that's what I do. And that's led me to present a series known as Psychedelics in Africa, The Untold Story, where I take people on a chronological, geographical journey of Africa and then into the diaspora, just sharing and teaching about different groups and cultures that you find on the continent and off the continent that utilize psychedelics for a range of different reasons, primarily as a tool, a technology to communicate with their ancestors, but they also use it as a divination tool for understanding what healing may be required within themselves and within the community and or the village. And there's also other components and realities that they utilize it for. But it's all kind of woven into their oral traditions, into their mythology. So you got to kind of be into that. And if you've got the science, lens with you, then you can start to marry the science with the mythology. You can kind of see where like their science is like interwoven into this mythology, which is an oral tradition. And they talk about this stuff, man. So I felt like, let me go sit at the feet of some of the elders and hear what they've got to say, man. So what I've learned over the years is what I teach and share as well, what I'm allowed to as well.
Yeah, so most of us are kind of familiar with the use of what's almost called classical psychedelics, like ayahuasca or mushrooms even in South and Latin America. But it's really you who's kind of brought to the public the use in Africa. So is it just ibogaine or is it a range? I mean, tell us what what the African psychedelic experience is.
Cool. Well, I have to give kudos where kudos and credit is due, because I was actually inspired by my teacher, Kalindi E. I'm trusting that some people of your listeners may be familiar with him. If not, you can do your research. His name is spelled Kilindi, Kalindi E. His last name is spelled Iyyi. That was my teacher, man. He was the one who really inspired me. He was actually a master martial artist. He was world renowned, known around the world for his fighting sciences, as he referred to it. And he taught about the African origins of martial arts. That was what I knew him for over 30 plus years. But within his mystery system of martial arts, he taught that the deeper you get into martial arts, you come to find out that martial arts was birthed by magic mushrooms, or we commonly call magic mushrooms, and that in Africa we utilize mushrooms for fighting sciences as well. And he would always say that mushrooms are not just a medicine. They can be used as medicine, but they're not medicine. They bring so much more to the table than that. And they've got a healing component, yes, but they also have a warfare component. And he was breaking it down, and this was my introductory into like really discovering for myself, at least, what this was all about. And he took me and his students from the ancient world right through to the here and now, and just sharing different groups that utilize this stuff. So one of the technologies or the plants that a lot of people are pretty much familiar with in Africa, as you mentioned, is iboga. But some people don't know iboga. They know ibogaine, which is one of the active compounds in iboga, or what in Africa they refer to as iboka. So indigenously, it's known as iboka. And that was gifted, as they say or refer in their oral traditions, to them by the gods, to commune with their ancestors. There's a whole plethora of mythologies associated with how the gods gifted it to the people, why they gifted it to them. One of the narratives suggests that there was a wife whose husband who died. She didn't know where he was and was in search of his body, trying to find it. And then she ends up in his cave, and there was this plant growing in the cave. And she hears a voice. It's asking her who she is, where she comes from, what she's doing. She explains that she's looking for her husband, and the voice, which is the voice of God, or Zambi, one of the creator gods. And he says to eat the plant, to eat its roots. And when she eats the plant and eats the plant roots, her dead husband and all of her ancestors appear in front of her. And, and according to the traditions in Gabon, this was like the first baptism. This is the first introduction of humans into iboga. And yes, they utilized it for communicating with their ancestors. But in addition to communicating with their ancestors, they use it as a technological device, I guess, just like how we use the mobile phone. They use it for GPS. They use it for, all the things that we utilize phones for in the here and now. I refer to it, I say like it's ET phone home, it's to make that call home to the ancestors. You make that call, and, if you're not sure where you're going, you can utilize it to find out where you're going within your life. But also, if, for example, say there's a drought in the region and we want to know where the waters are, where the waters are coming from, like they would utilize it as a technology to commune with the ancestors to find out, should we go east? Should we go west? Where's, this is how you hear them referring to utilizing iboga. And with that said, you find out that they don't really reference it how we do in the West, where they commonly say it's good for heroin addiction and alcohol recovery and stuff like that, which is really cool because, like I mentioned, I'm from East London and we need a lot of that in East London. We've got a lot of people running around here addicted to opiate drugs and alcohol and stuff. But I think it's, worth us investing in telling the story of the people and what they say, who it was gifted to, what it's all about. So that's what I do and what I teach and share. So that's just one iboga. And in that same region, they have a creation story where they talk about the origins of mushrooms, and they utilize mushrooms and they utilize it for communicating with the great mother, who has the same name as the mushroom, so there's loads of mythologies around it. But what you come to find out, the mythologies are all to do pretty much with a rites of passage. It's like a movement from childhood into adulthood. And there's various rites of passages for young boys and various ones for young girls. And depending on where you are on the continent, the approach may vary. But there is a utilization of psilocybin mushrooms. There's a utilization of what we're commonly familiar with, the Amanita, from the Amanita family, primarily the Amanita pantherina, which we commonly call the Black Panther mushroom. I know many people might have seen the comic series or the movie Black Panther. It ties in, like they utilize it to activate the hero or the heru inside of themselves, or the warrior. And just like some people may have heard of like the Viking mushroom being a fly agaric, or the Amanita mushroom, it's like utilized in Africa in a similar way as well to this day. So you find different mushrooms. You find in the ancient world, amongst the ancient Egyptians, they worked with psilocybin mushrooms. They worked with
that was definitely something new to me when you told me that. So, yes, tell us a bit more about the ancient Egyptians. Maybe that's why they built the pyramids, was it?
Boy, there you go. As above, so below, man. They were trying to build heaven on earth. They observe this stuff, the sacred geometry that some of us experience when we take these plant technologies and stuff. They were mimicking that down here. They were role playing what they saw. So yeah, in ancient Egypt, which, they've got, as I say, they've got mushroom growing kits plastered all over the walls. They've got the women carrying these mushroom baskets that they take into ceremonies, which they would utilize in the temples. And these mushrooms, in combination with the blue lotus flower, which they would ferment in red wine in particular and use it as a holy sacrament. And it later becomes, again, one of the ways that they would have Holy Communion. And I know some of us might be familiar with Holy Communion in the church, for example, where they hand out wafers and wine as well, in fact. And then what we find out maybe is that the missing link is that in ancient Egypt and other places, it's not a wafer that they're handing out for one to have Holy Communion. That wafer or that little white disc, I would like to think, would be the mushroom cap, and the red wine has the blue lotus fermented in it. They suggest that the blue lotus and the red wine has this aphrodisiac effect. It enhances their senses, and they say it's very similar to MDMA, according to the people who are doing the research in it from a scientific lens. So in the ancient world, they've been doing that, and it's still a custom that is carried through to this day. And last but definitely not least, they had DMT, man. Ancient Egyptians had their own version of ayahuasca, that goes back over 10,000 years. So, and they utilized it, the actual plant that they refer to is the Acacia nilotica. It grows all along the Nile and the Nile Valley civilization, from the small people where I mentioned earlier on, in the Nile Valley all the way up to Egypt, were utilizing this, making their own brews and concoctions.
So they largely made drinks with it rather than snorting.
Drink it, snorting, brews. Yeah, there's different ways they chew it. Amongst the Maasai in East Africa, they work with it as well, and they make these snuffs, and concoctions where so there's an alchemy out there, man. There's an alchemy out there where they utilize the whole plant from top to bottom and ingest it in a range of different ways. And depending upon the dosage, it was very dose specific. They might use it for hunting. There's times when they use it for hunting. There's other times where they use it for, for enhancing one's senses, as we know, to see better, to hear better. If you're out in the pitch black night, you've got to avoid things and or see things, to utilize these technologies and heighten your senses so you can see better, hear better. It's an advantage to one. So, Terence McKenna talks about this in his theories of the stoned ape hypothesis, as it's known. But with that said, it's still utilized in that way today, man. We have an unbroken link of using it like that in Africa.
Yes, and so you've brought this enormous knowledge, and I'm going to say that if you get a chance to hear Darren speak, do you have some talks on YouTube people can watch? Because the way you take people through this whole historical narrative is fantastic. So if you do, can you put them up on the notes afterwards so people can watch you if you have them?
Yeah, man. So they can just go on YouTube, type my name in, Darren Le Baron.
Type your name.
Yeah, okay. And if you go onto my website, darrenlebaron.com, you can actually find, I've got a webinar series. So I've got like up to nearly 6 hours worth of content that covers the journey that I've been on, since the early research, and I put it all in one place and space for people to be able to check out. So just check out the website.
Oh, fantastic. And we'll stick that up as well at the end so people can find it easily. Why do you think the West has kind of drifted away from those insights? I mean, having seen both cultures, what do you think? Where have we gone wrong?
Well, I guess we're just in a new phase of history where a lot of the wisdom keepers, the people who held on or had that information, are either no longer here or had to suppress that knowledge and information because they were considered witches, the bad guys, the outlaws. The same goes for Africa. It's still very much taboo in a lot of places because of the introduction of, religion and, Western approaches to, life. So that narrative has made psychedelics pretty much a taboo. But if you are able to come across the elders and the wisdom keepers, which we do have here in the UK, you definitely can find them in places like the West, like Cornwall and Ireland and Scotland. There's some people who hold on to the ancient British, traditions and can identify the plant technologies that we have here and can share how they're utilized. But what's happened is, modern society, man, and that's what's caused a lot of our distractions from being in nature. And because we're now in the classroom, because we're now in the office, because we're now in front of a screen 24/7, we've been disconnected from nature. And that disconnection from nature stops that knowledge, that natural knowledge flowing, And for me, that's kind of like the fundamental reason. The further you get away from nature, the lack of knowledge you have about it, therefore you're not interested in it or inspired.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle downwards, isn't it? But I don't think it's started with the mobile phone. I think probably started with the Catholic Church, didn't it?
There you go. If you're pointing fingers, but yeah, man, that's what. No, that's what. No.
You're a man. You said you were brought up as a Catholic,
Yeah, man.
which is interesting. So, I mean, you must have reflected on your early education and now your later education. Well, maybe you can see some overlap.
Ironically, yeah, religion in the here and now has played a big part because, as you're aware that, how that was influenced and inspired around the world wasn't done, just through organic inspiration, man. That was done through, bloodsheds and violence, and it was forced on people. So as we know in the UK, the killing of the witches, and that's throughout Europe and that's throughout the whole world. That European influences in a particular period of time went around the world and caused a riot. History suggests that, and we're aware of that. And those same people, those same powers were anti, female, were anti the traditions, were anti-black people. Like a lot of the anti stuff that we need to be pro for now, they were kind of anti a lot of that, and that was part of their structure, and in making sure that was being enforced. But with that said, I'm also aware that this downfall of these practices, or even before religion, there's what can I say? Humans do what humans do. And we've been doing it for a while, there's good humans and not so good humans, for lack of a better spectrum. And, there's ancient priesthoods that wanted to keep this amongst themselves and, kept it a secret, and you had to be initiated, and it wasn't for the masses. And there was power struggles around, getting access to this information and giving the masses, breadcrumbs, the wafer, and we'll keep the true manna, we'll keep the true manna to ourselves. And that's just, like I said, that's kind of filtered out through, through history. And you've only got to look at the mobile phone, one of the most popular mobile phones or technologies, the Apple, with the apple being bitten, the forbidden fruit, it being the logo, and then when you get into the religion of Christianity in particular, it was the serpent told Eve and Adam, if you eat from this apple, you will have godlike knowledge and information. And the gods didn't want them to have that kind of information, so it's like a principle, it's a force that I've seen from the ancient world in the religious world. And I guess in the here and now, there's forces that don't want us to have access to all knowledge and information, and they keep it to themselves, and they later become these secret societies and stuff like that we hear about in these conspiracy theory type circles.
Indeed, yeah, quite. Do you meet any resistance in the UK to your teachings and your celebrations?
Yeah, definitely, man. And it wouldn't just because of this. As I said, I get people to tell me, mushrooms are poisonous, mushrooms are deadly, mushrooms don't taste nice. Just on the surface level, I get resistance, let alone, when you're dealing with people who are maybe not as educated or privy to this stuff, and they've been given a programming that psychedelics are dangerous. They're deadly and you need to be careful. And as I mentioned to you when we met, man, that's why I reference you a lot in all of my work, to kind of bring education into the space and place and educate people. Do you really know what you're talking about? Or are you just believing what you've read in the paper or seen in the movies and stuff like that? Because if I look at some scientists like Professor David Nutt and the research that he done, and we look at these so-called recreational drugs, we can see that the most harmful drugs that are out there are the ones that you are comfortable using and utilizing and being sold, on every single street corner. And the ones that are transformational, like I'm suggesting, are less harmful. And and people say, oh, you're mushroom biased. Of course you're going to say that. And that's then where you've got to bring evidence. So whenever I meet resistance, I just bring education and knowledge, some evidence, and allow people to make executive decisions for themselves. And hopefully we can then have a mature conversation about it. But if not, bash my head against a brick wall anymore with it. I just meet people where they're at and allow them to make decisions for themselves.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Darren. I haven't thought about it before, but what's clever about your approach is that you're actually doing something which is kind of accepted as kind of important, which is growing food, but also using the knowledge they're gaining to learn about nature, and then indirectly, through certain magic mushrooms, learning about the mind and the soul. And, this experience that for many, many other cultures has been really quite central, and which is lost here. And then potentially bringing that to, allowing that to facilitate, because most people who take psychedelics become much more interested and connected with nature. Do you actually have an educational package in schools that's alongside the horticulture and the mushroom growing. I mean, do you have a book for school kids that teaches them about this?
Yeah, so with our program, like folks are able to reach out to me and or the We Are Grow project. And yes, once like a student and or a school wants to incorporate our accreditation into their curriculum, yeah, there's several handbooks and workbooks and stuff like that that go alongside. It's not necessarily accessible to the general public at this stage, but yeah, if you're, as long as you're, I always say to people, did you go to school? Do you know somebody in a school? Like whatever connection you have with a school, do you live near a school? Then that's your way in, and like just speak to somebody in a school, and that starts with a school teacher, the head teacher, the PTA, and say, hey, like mushrooms are important because they're the soil creators. And nothing goes on this planet as we know it today without soil. We need to be having this conversation. We need to understand that recycling and composting is important. And we don't need to be, waiting till there's no soil left for us to then start saying, what do we do now? So it might be a little too late. So yeah, with that said, like we can have the conversation.
Well, that's a really important point. I mean, let's assume it's not too late.
Yeah.
How can we make sure it isn't too late? I mean, do you see any way in which we can have psychedelic experiences? They do seem to be quite important to people like you who've actually made really active moves to educate and to think and to change the way you approach life. How do you think we can begin to roll it out in a more broader, more egalitarian way?
For me, the key is education, because in the broader sense of things, like the masses are not privy to this stuff. Me and you, we're privy to this stuff. We go to the conferences, we're at the seminars, at the lectures, and, and when we're there, we're around people who are privy to this stuff. But that is we live in a bubble. That's what I've come to find out, because I'm from the streets, the hoods, the ghettos of East London. And when I go out there, people are not talking about what's happening at Imperial and the research that MAPS are doing or none of that type of stuff. So for me, it's really important that people are educated about what's actually going on. And for my goal is just being able to do my best at translating what the scientists are talking about and bringing that to a level where people can get their heads around it, where we can have a mature conversation about it. And then what's really important is that people can see it in their lives. So even if you're coming from, like most people are interested when they get sick. Again, it's like we have to wait to be an extreme case. We need to be an extreme case of depression or PTSD or be diagnosed with cancer and being told that we've got a few months to live before we start looking at this as an alternative. But as you're aware, in these other places around the world, who have been doing this stuff, they may not see it as an alternative. They might see it as the primary way. It's the way that they've been doing things. And it may also be the way that it's prevented them from having anxiety, depression and PTSD and that type of stuff. So for me, it's about spreading that message.
Well, that's a great message. I mean, can I ask you about that? Do you think that has given you resilience, your early experiences with mushrooms?
Yeah, well, for me personally, on my own journey, I always let people know that from my own experiences, it allowed me to lighten my load. For all the places and spaces these mushrooms have taken me physically and metaphysically and all the rest of it, the most important thing for me is that, I carried a lot of baggage that didn't serve me well, in like trying to just understand myself, understand my mind. And I carried, for lack of a better word, trauma that I didn't even know that I was carrying. I didn't know that I inherited. Some of it I curated myself. Some of it was part of being in this society that we live in, So all of that being revealed to me in the way that it allowed me to start working through that and navigating that for myself within my community, or what I like to call the village. And I guess that's what's missing is the village. It takes a village to raise a child, as we know. And through our isolation and feeling isolated and being by ourselves out here, for the most part, we feel like I can't do this. I can't manage, I can't cope. And for me, that's what's important, educating people and creating community. And through the education and through the community, I think we can start making the first steps to just doing the work that we need to do. And on the other end of the spectrum, we've got all this amazing research that's being done at these places that I mentioned, at Imperial and throughout the world now, Australia and, America and everywhere, it's like starting to have this conversation. We can marry those two worlds, the ghetto streets of East London with what's happening at the universities, and see, like, let's all sit around the table and let's bring in those native indigenous people, those First Nation people, and hear what they've got to say. And I think that's how we can start to move things forward in a more balanced way.
Well, I think that's a great call to action there, Darren. It's clear to me that a person like you in every school, we did a campaign we got to replicate Darren, because I mean, there's no question that you bring so much wisdom and in different areas that each of which is critically important, not just psychedelics but also diet.
I really appreciate that, but at the same time, I'd also say, man, I've got some people who've inspired me. There's people out there doing the work as well, and I like to give them their flowers and stuff. So I encourage people to just check me out, check out my work, and then you'll see me pointing to other people that are out there doing amazing work. And, and like, if we can all get the support in different capacities, I think we can then come together and form something amazing. Well, we're already doing it, but yeah, it's small and slow solutions at this stage. And we know there's, like, as some people refer to it, a renaissance taking place. So maybe, we can get some kind.
But you're the first person who's really I've met, and that's why I wanted you on the program. You're the first person who's actually, you're at the hard end. I'm at the easy end. It's all science and it's safe and it's intellectual. You're actually kind of, I talk the talk, you walk the walk, Darren, and I'm very impressed by that. And I want to thank you on behalf of those of us who are talking the talk for doing that. And if we can help you more, let's do it. I like the idea of getting together. It was an absolute pleasure talking with you the other day. It's been fantastic having you on the program. And let's see if we can work together in other ways as well. So thank you so much for coming on the program.
Let's keep it going. Let's keep spreading the spores. All right, David, man. Well, thank you.
Spreading the spores. I love that. Absolutely. Let's spread the spores, Dan. Thank you.
Until next time.
Cheers.